Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Boyce, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me on the opposite end of the United States, you are in what city, Joni?
I am in Media, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia.
Media, Pennsylvania. Actually, my wife was just in PA. Here is the Alchemy of Power by Dr. Joni Carley. Let me try and get it straight next to my face. I met Joni through a gentleman, or through a series of gentlemen, actually, and she was a co-author of a book called Holomovement. And I was so excited about the work that they were doing that I invited her to be on the show again to speak about her book. All of you know Phil Clothier because he has been on for not only the Holomovement, but also his other bill, growing business of sustainability. I maybe got it a little bit wrong, but you guys can look for that podcast and we'll put a link. Joni, I appreciate you being on. It's a pleasure having you, and especially with your background. And we're going to have a really exciting podcast today, but I'm going to let our listeners know. Dr. Joni Carley is the author of The Alchemy of Power, Mastering Invisible Factors of Leadership. She works on consciousness and culture through advisory consulting services, including as a United Nations ECOSOC consultant and convener of the United Nations NGO, Major Groups Unitive Cluster. She's also advises leaders, speaks, and provides media guest experience, and writes articles about creating principles-based, values-driven, united world. Boy, do we need that, Joni. I hope that you and all the people at United Nations can get that done quickly. She draws from a unique depth and breadth of experience, ranging from the jungle to the boardroom and to the C-suite to the podium, the African bush to the Asian temples, and from universities to the United Nations, including the Doctor of Ministry in the Reinvention of Work, One Spirit Interfaith Seminary Orientation, 30 years of co-creating interspiritual events and indigenous religious and spiritual leaders and spiritual artists, including the UN World Interfaith Harmony, UN Forum on Indigenous Ceremony, and Global Unity Earth celebrations. Well, quite a bio. You're certainly the person to talk about the power of alchemy with our listeners. If you would, now that the listeners have a bit of a background, what led you to actually wanting to write this book, the Alchemy of Power in leadership in particular? Because I know you've done work with Barrett. So that's the link with Phil. So tell us a little bit about how you got here with this book.
Well, I had a path of many paths, and one of those was consulting, working with leaders, and realizing that I did a marketing survey one time, and I realized that my clientele was so disparate. It was so different from each other. I couldn't figure out what's the unifying thread here of who are these people that are coming to me. And so I did a marketing survey and found out they were all really smart. They were all really successful or between successes. Often that's what people will call people like me, as the between times. And they all had a lot of heart. And that combination is showing up, and it's a larger profile than that, but there's a demographic that fits that's huge and growing. The other part of that led me to it was I was also really had strong spiritual callings. And you said one spirit orientation. It was one spirit ordination. I ordained as an interfaith minister.
Sorry.
And I think of that as interspiritual because I'm not religious, but spiritual, and have trekked the world, including in the jungle with shamans and temples and churches and monasteries and, many indigenous teachers all over the world for most of my lifetime. And for most of my career, I kept separate websites. I kept a firewall between these two things because there was really that if you get any bit of that sort of fluffy stuff into the mix, then you're discounted, right? If it's spiritual, then it can't be about success. If it's,
Yeah.
and
Well, spirituality in business was certainly something that, I told you previously, it goes way back, and we used to go to conferences in San Francisco. And, it wasn't hidden, but it certainly wasn't at the forefront. It was something that we kind of had to tiptoe around a little bit more than we would. And you mentioned in the preface of the book that the book's about expanding leadership consciousness. Because good leaders evolve, but great leaders consciously evolve. How is it that great leaders transform their personal consciousness in your estimation? In other words, that's a big question, because consciousness is like this big amorphous word that we talk about, yet it's kind of hard to drill down and say, so what does that mean? What makes me more conscious than you? Not really. I think as a group, we allude, or I shouldn't say allude, we basically have a greater level of consciousness. And as you know, some companies, Patagonia would probably be one I would mention, they have a culture of evolving conscious leaders. And many companies do, but not all companies. So what would you say for somebody who's out there working in a company that wants to actually kind of elevate not only their personal consciousness, but also of all the people around them?
Yeah, Greg, you just unpacked. We could talk all 45 minutes just on that question. I mean, really, that is so
That's
huge.
That's the alignment question.
So
Richard Barrett's alignment question.
So first of all, me more conscious than you, that's not the conversation, because, you're already out of the territory if you're in that me versus you in the realm of consciousness. But consciousness is causal. So before anything else happens, it's a matter of consciousness, right? Consciousness is, something happens in the domain of consciousness before it ever happens in the domain of physicality. And so, but we tend to ignore it. In my book, I call it the fluffy theory, that anything that we can't touch is inconsequential, fluffy stuff. And it's like an iceberg. If you think of it like an iceberg, the only 5% of it shows. The bottom 5% is invisible to the eye, but it's going to be the most, no pun intended, impactful on your boat if you get close to it, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you think of the human experience as in the same format as an iceberg, as an analogy, the strategies, the behaviors, all of those things are that 5% at the top. The underlying invisibilities are where consciousness lies. And they're really the most consequential in terms of the iceberg's not going to stay where it is without that bottom 95% rooted to the ground. And these areas, these invisible areas that most MBA programs are going to tell people to ignore because you can't put it on a spreadsheet. And so, but at your own peril. And as the world is shifting toward wanting a better world, what we talked about in the beginning, leaders who are functioning in this old leadership paradigm are going to find themselves irrelevant, because the world's calling. The world is desperate for a new leadership. And Patagonia is a great example. As certain companies are minding their cultures, which culture is a reflection of consciousness. So every social breakdown is first and foremost a breakdown of consciousness.
Right.
And so, if you go back to the level of consciousness and say for yourself, what is that? It's really not comparing to anything or wanting to be anything. It's saying, let me settle in, take a moment and just reflect. Take a moment and tap into that little bitty kind of angst in my gut that I've been ignoring and pushing aside. Let me breathe into that for 5 minutes and see what happens. I mean, it's a big unknown, like the bottom of the ocean, the deep unknown, but it's the willingness to tap into that deeper, like the bottom of the iceberg, tap into that deeper sourceful place that matters so much. And culture is really a reflection of that. And it also supports. So if you're in a culture that's really toxic, then your consciousness is going to get rocked in that culture. It's going to be hard to maintain a steady consciousness there, and you're probably not going to perform that well. But if your culture is such that you're respected, you're included, there's what I call mojo, the energy's popping, and there's strength, and there's really good things happening, then people they perform their best when they're stopping for coffee. They're not gossiping or cutting off conversations. The ideas are popping. Oh, I had this idea. I wanted to tell you about your project. I forgot. Here you are. And that really is alchemy, right? Those are the things you can't put them on a spreadsheet. You can't. But that person goes back to their desk, and they're all the more empowered. They work a little harder. They've got a new idea of their own now added to the one they just got over coffee. And all of a sudden magic's happening and nobody even realized it happened, while somebody was putting their cream in.
Yeah, it's, when you think about, Yvon Chouinard and him basically doing an ESOP, and, when is enough, right? He had, I think it was $1 billion, right? Something like that. And he made an employee-owned company. And, for a long time, he wasn't in that space. If anybody knows anything about him, it was all about grab, get more, have more, do more, whatever. And he came to this realization as an entrepreneur who had started Patagonia, that wasn't going to work for him anymore. And I think that's a great example. And in the book, you discuss mastering the invisible factors of leadership. And I think that's an important tipping point, what I just said, for someone to actually say, okay, I have enough. I'm okay. I can give this to my employees and we can move forward. Could you explain these invisible factors and how they can affect and impact a leader like Yvon Chouinard, like many other people who have done this, but we're on that example, so we might as well use it. But you're talking about all these invisible factors that are underneath the iceberg, right? And when they become visible and we become aware, we actually shift our behaviors associated with what it is that we do every day.
That's right. Again, it comes down to the consciousness. Consciousness is causal of behaviors.
Right.
So, and one way that we access consciousness is to look at values. And those are invisible, right? I value connection, as do most people, right? That's one thing across the world, what people value across all demographics, almost more than anything else, is connection. And so, where is that in our economic values? It's evaluations. It's nowhere. And so you get a CEO who's looking at standard valuations, and they don't see that their employee connectivity really matters. But when you measure the values and the culture of a company and you do the math with how much they're making, Patagonia is a great example. He got it. He got it. Yeah. That it was going to be more successful. And now the data's in. When I got into this field, it was a crapshoot. Honestly, it was a crapshoot because there was no data to back this up. And now the whole back of my book is references to studies that really anchors this data, that it's clear now. Profits go up, share prices go up, social indicators go up. Pretty much every indicator you look at goes up when people attend to these intangibles like values. Are the values such that everybody's playing full out? Are they respecting family? Is there some humor? Are there ethics? Are there sharing? Or is it silo? Is there gossip? Are there negative values playing out? I'm sure you went into a lot of that with Phil, but that's really a good key. And that's why I'm so passionate about the Barrett work, because when we do these measurements in a company, you get data-based reports that spit out all kinds of graphs and charts and clarity on these things. And then you can be accountable. And that's a big part of the problem, is nobody's accounting for culture, even though mainstream all the way across the board, it is undeniable now that culture is the biggest factor of success, bar none. It matters. No other factor is nearly as influential as your company's culture. That's established. That's no longer a fringy idea. That's well established.
Yeah.
And still, how many CEOs do you know who are actually accounting for their culture or even thinking about it? And
Very
so
few.
part of it is right, very, very. A big part of it is just taking the time to say, okay, maybe I need to go slow to go fast for a minute here. Maybe I need to step back and look at how does it feel in here. I use the word mojo, and I describe mojo as that kind of spark of life, that kind of that jazz, that zip, that it's what makes life live, right? We can put all the elements of a human being in a lab dish, but we can't make a human being because we don't have that metaphysical understanding. And that's what I'm talking about here, is tapping into the metaphysics. And we tend to think that's a bugaboo area. It's not. It's the science and the philosophy of causality, of what causes what. And many, generations ago, what was metaphysical was considered, crazy and metaphysical, is now standard physics and science. Standard physics, standard science comes out of the metaphysical before we can concretize it. But yet we tend to throw away that whole 95%, that metaphysical, that bottom, we call it, in my book, I call it the fluffy myth, or the fluffy,
right.
That this is inconsequential, fluffy stuff.
Well, like you said, many of the universities and the educational institutions that people come out of with their masters in businesses, they're not really teaching that. They're teaching the fundamentals. Now, these should be the fundamentals, and you and I both agree with that. And
it's
you just, what?
It's a both end, because it's a yin and a yang.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, no, so let's talk about Mojo Flow. You just mentioned it. I had a question about it, and you referred to it in the book, and it seems to be a pretty major point for you. You've said it several times now. But how can we channel the individual Mojo Flow and then the collective Mojo Flow to transform an organization? So in other words, if you've got this spark happening, this like boom inside of a company, and you see that things are clicking, how do you harness that power? Because there's huge power in that. And the alchemy, you're talking about the alchemy of power. That's really it. Stuff starts to happen. Stuff starts to, as they say, shit happens, right? A lot of good things start happening.
Also,
can you
happens.
Yeah. Can you clarify that for our audience a little bit more?
Yeah.
Or is that as about as clear as it's going to get?
Well, you just said it really well. But I think the important part is to value it. Right? We know that this is what makes life go, whether it's in the office or outside. I mean, this is what makes life go. So I think one really big question is to ask yourself, how's my mojo?
Mm-hmm.
And just check in on it. Everybody knows when the mojo is flowing, oh man, people can't wait to do the next thing. They can't help themselves. They forget lunch just happened and they missed it. I mean, that's what happens when things are flowing, and it starts to create its own momentum. And then the issue is focus, for sure. There are certain issues of, channeling that. But for a leader to walk into a room and say, first of all, to be accountable for their own mojo. Maybe my mojo's dissipate. Maybe it's really down today. Maybe I had a fight with somebody, or maybe I'm not feeling so good. So I'm not in the greatest mojo. So be aware of that. This might not be the day to drive a big project. This might be a day to study something a little harder, to just own it. And then to look in the room and say, how's everybody else's mojo?
Right.
And if you step back and really ask that question in full authenticity and in the spirit of listening and receptivity, and really do an assessment, how's everybody else's mojo going? And if you take that minute to take that assessment and honestly take it in, and it might take you 3 days to fully assess it and manage it, but to honor it as valuable data that we can quantify with the Barrett work, we can quantify that. So it is quantifiable data, but in that moment, it's not. It's in that domain of metaphysics that tends to be more amorphous.
It's in the fluffy area for certain. Mm-hmm. But the most important thing is, if you're aware, you feel it. And I think the sense is, if you're conscious, your feelings of these things, your intuition is greater than it's ever been. And I wanted you, because you started to talk about the yin and the yang, and I think this is an important principle. This Taoist philosophy around dualism, right? There's lots of books out there about dualism, which is denoted by the concepts of yin and yang. But you state that yin and yang describe the inherent dualism of life, but are not fixed opposites. Okay. Now, I think many people would probably say, well, I thought they were fixed opposites. If you could explain this concept to the listeners, because I think it's a really important one that you bring up in the book.
Thank you for bringing it up, Greg. I think it's really critical. I think if we could use this lens more often, it could really reshape a lot of conversations that are critical. So let me just unpack. Yin and Yang are Taoist philosophy of expansion and contraction,
Right.
dark and light. It is sort of oppositional in that sense. But when you see the symbol with the thing, there's always the Yang dot in the Yin and the Yin dot in the Yang. It's never absolute, and it's relativistic. Right? I may be more Yang than the next person, but the next person may be more Yang than me. And so it's relative, and that gets us out of these absolutes, this us versus them, this dualistic kind of thinking that we're so caught up in. And especially now in America, we're so polarized.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of polarization doesn't serve. It just doesn't serve. At the end of the day, we are one world. We are one people in one place. And so we have to come to terms with that. And I think yin and yang are helpful. So my theory is that we've had Yang-itis. So Yang is the data, the numbers, the typical measurements of success, the concrete, and it's all good. It's not yin or yang, but most of our evaluations in acculturations for millennia have been very Yang dominant. We've had male leaders of religions and institutions. Militarization has been our answer to problems for a big part of our lives. The dollar has superseded caring and compassion. And so all of that are what I'm lumping into what I'm calling Yang-itis. Mm-hmm. And that's really just a swing a little too far yang. And so there is a call right now that's swinging yinward. And that's what people call airy-fairy, new agey. Like there's a lot of degrading terms to that. And that degradation has to do with these cultural norms that are highly Yang dominant. And so anything that looks yin looks threatening and looks inconsequential, fluffy stuff. Nothing is further from the truth. The bottom of the iceberg is no more fluffy than the top. I mean, it's really all the more substance, but you just can't see it. And so that's what we have to get to, is these yin factors. And, it's no accident that women have been suffering so badly under this, because they represent the more yin.
Right.
But also as a helpful lens on gender issues, especially these days as gender has become more fluid. We've got male, female. You can't be both. You can't, you get all these arguments. If you say this person has a lot more yin in them, they're assigned male at birth, but they tend to be they're leaning more yinward, more yinward, more yinward. Well, that's a way of conceptualizing that breaks through this polarity. And, if you're born, you have a front and a back, you have a top and a bottom. It's just part of the physicality of being on Earth. We are dualistic. That's just our reality. We have a dark and a light. It's just here. We can't see you can't see the white printing on the Zoom screen if it didn't have a black background. It's got to be there. And so fighting against duality is not an answer. But the answer is embracing it and being conscious with it. And that's really what I'm saying is yin and yang are a way of accessing this domain that's that's tough to access in best of times, but when we're also acculturated to not only devalue this domain, but to actually denigrate it, to throw it away.
Yeah.
Our peril.
And I think it's really, just a personal notation here. It's more about balance, right? And I think, we all have male, we all have female. Yeah. We all exhibit these behaviors, but it's really to understand that, can you hold that energy of that balance? Some people have said to me, oh, you seem more female than male. And I said, well, no, I'm very male, but I have learned how to deal with the female side of me, right? And it's a very important part, the part around compassion, the part around love, the part around caring, the part around understanding. And that brings me to this mention in the chapter that you have. We keep talking about this invisible, and so I want to get to it. The mechanics, that everything we currently know and see constitutes 5% of the universe. 95% of our reality is a mystery, right? And I was watching a documentary the other day about 0 point energy, okay? So for all of you who are not aware, there is free energy out there. Many of it's already been there, but because of the way our world is designed, we have big, corporations that are kind of controlling all of this, but the reality it is there. But all 100% is always in the dynamic state of cosmic emergence that begins with what you say, the bang. How can we use alchemy to tap into the other 95%?
Whoa, another big one we could do 3 shows on. You think so large, Greg. I love it. I do want to touch on the word before I go into that, and the word balance first, because I like the word equanimity. So in terms of yin and yang, if you breathe in, you're more yang, you breathe out, you're more yin. Right. If you hit absolute homeostasis with that, you don't have to die right then and there to hold it. Like and so I think really the mastery here is there are times to be more yang, there are times to be more yin. And by you expanding to open up to more yin influence, more yin aspects of yourself, it gives you a greater range of possibility in your responses to things. And the equanimity is the ability to discern and make a conscious decision of, I'm going to come down hard right now, or I'm going to come down soft right now. And that's a discernment in the moment. And the more spiritual and personal homework you've done, the more capacity you're going to have for that discernment in that moment. So it's not an absolute, and that's part of the problem of our polarity thinking. We come to this sense of there's an absolute place to be. No, this is all emergent from what my dear friend Jude Caravan calls the big breath. I wrote in my book The Big Bang because I hadn't heard from her, but she's she's done the cosmology that proves that the universe probably breathed out, which again is a more yin perspective, right? Our history is so young. It banged into existence, and so of course we're young, right? But if it breathed into existence, do you see like these subtle distinctions? And that's the same way as accessing this alchemy. So you can give one leader two leaders, you can give them both the exact same people, resources, financial, materials, deadlines, all the same. One turns out innovation, quality. The other one turns out stuff that's falling apart. The team's already flustered. What's the difference there? The difference is in the leadership, and that's what I'm calling alchemy. And that leadership, alchemy, we used to think of it as the ability to turn lead into gold. Right? But that's a very limited understanding. It's the ability to create more than the sum of parts, right? What created that excellence when the sum of parts, was what it was? It could have been in the middle between these two people, but one did really well, one did really poorly, rather than both did in the middle. What explains that difference? What explains the difference is these intangibles that leaders like Patagonia, there's a lot of companies that are more expansive in bringing in these ideas now. This is an idea whose time has come and the numbers are in, so it's no longer a question. It's really old paradigm, enculturation at this point, and it's going to take some time for this to come in, but paying attention, just attending to and finding a way to value, checking yourself when you realize it's like when you're speaking a new language and you use a wrong word and you figure that out 5 hours later. And then you get to a point where you figure it out right after the conversation, and then you figure it out in the conversation. It's the same thing of stepping back and looking at this domain of mojo or consciousness or values and these intangibles. And you start to step back and say, what's playing out here? Just take a moment. Again, it's that adage of go slow to go fast for a moment, because you will rocket ship if you can get this kind of alchemical fuel under. This is fuel. Mojo is fuel. It is the ultimate fuel of the human behavior. And so if you can look at what's going to stoke your mojo, what's going to stoke somebody else's mojo in this moment, and it may be just being quiet, it doesn't mean getting loud and pushy. It means, what will nurture that spark of spirit in the moment.
Well, you brought up something. You talked about breathing in and breathing out, just taking a moment. And I happen to be leaving in a week for a meditation retreat on the Orcas Islands with Dr. Joel and Michelle Levy. And many of the listeners out there know the Tonglen, the healing power of Tonglen. So we are bringing in the negative and breathing out the positive. That's the easiest way for me to kind of explain it. But I think what's really important is that we're putting into the ethers of the universe these kind of things by saying, hey, look, if we all practiced this Tonglen kind of meditation, we would see a change in ourselves first, and a huge change in everybody around us, right? Because of what we're doing. We're putting this energy into the ether. So that brings me to some practical strategies. At every one of these chapters, you've got questions at the back. And I think when somebody gets a book in particular that's as intriguing as this one, that I wanted to ask you about, for someone who's aspiring leader, how do they implement and how do they take some of these practical strategies or exercises? I don't really refer to them as exercises, but maybe they were, to implement them into becoming, or I should say, in mastering these invisible factors that you've been talking about, because you outline all the invisible factors in the book, right?
Maybe not all of them.
Well, you
I opened up the question
got a
there.
lot of them in there. That's for certain. Yes. So my question for you is this: hey, if I'm going to read a chapter and then go to your exercise in the end, I'm going to use these exercises to make me more aware of the invisible factors and then practice understanding how these invisible factors are affecting my consciousness.
Yeah, I call them leadership reflections. And what was important to me, and really going back to your very first question of what made me write the book, I had done all this trekking, found out all the power in this other realm of spirituality, seeing the leadership realm and thinking so much could come to bear and make such a good difference in the world. How can I bring these together? And I was fortunate enough to have an editor who gave me carte blanche to do exactly that. And so what was important to me was, and the question I was asking was, how can a leader apply what all this wealth of more than information, of inspiration and information that I was gathering, how can they apply it to what's going on their desks right now? Because that's what I did as a consultant, trying to bridge that. And so I put leadership reflections at the end of every chapter to really integrate the work. And it's not so much, here's this chapter, now here's what you have to do. It's not linear like that. It's how do you take this in and personally integrate it? Not every leader is going to look at every chapter at the end of every book, but every is going to answer every question at the end of the leadership reflections, but some of them are going to really stand out for you. So you're going to have to say, just to take a look at them, just to take time in this domain,
right,
is so critical. And again, it may not make sense to you right now. If you've been acculturated in old paradigm way, with almost all of us have. I have a doctorate in this, and I wrote a book on it. I'm still very acculturated in old paradigm because that's the water I swim in.
Well, you have one right here that came out of one of the chapters, and I think it says, take some time to dialogue with and seek wise counsel from people who stand out to you because they embody noble warrior and or heroic consciousness, in that they are curious, intuitive, compassionate, content wise, and they have a deep spirited life. Now, just that in itself would be something that if you took the time to dialogue with somebody like that, what you could actually learn. And your book is filled with, every chapter at the end, leadership reflections are in there. And if you only bought this book and all you did was go to the leadership reflections and follow some of the advice, it would be worth the price of the book.
I think the glossary too. If you just got the book and did the leadership reflections and read the glossary,
yeah.
I love the glossary because I unpack so many concepts like yin and yang and metaphysics and all of those things that really start to situate. It's a big word, ontology, but that's the ground of being. And many people understand and agree that we're at a paradigm change right now. And paradigm necessarily means changing the very ground of being, changing the very basis of where we're coming from. And that's kind of what the glossary does. It sets out a group of definitions that start to define some of this new territory. And many people are doing this, are defining new territory. And I'm sure most of them have already been on your show, Greg.
Well, I think that you're so interesting because your work at the UN, and it would be remiss of me not to include this in there. When you look at people, planets, profits, partnership, and purpose and peace, right? And I know I went through these with Phil, but obviously you being so directly connected, there's an organization that exemplifies, hopefully, because you're working inside that organization, the alchemy of power, the higher consciousness of people that are trying to, at their best, to change the way in which the world operates and treats one another and individuals and organizations and so on. If you would, tell us a little bit about the work that you do there or have done there and why you believe that's so important as it relates to this alchemy of power.
Well, the work that I do there, I started out, again, very separate space. I started out leading visionary dialogue with high-level leaders at the UN. And a visionary leaders series of dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
And they were self-selected. It was really interesting. I mean, we had high-level leaders in tears because they came to the UN with the charter, the values, the principles that the UN represented, and then they were caught in the hierarchy and the protocol and the some of the dysfunctions at the UN, and these dialogues were bringing that to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So, we really recognized the pain point. And one person said, if I was on an elevator and I spoke about some of this and the wrong person was also on that elevator, I could lose my career track.
Mm.
And back then that was the way. And, again, why I had the firewall between my websites and things like that. Over time, that's really changed in the last few years. That's just not so anymore. There are places around there. I was just at the high level political forum. They're calling for transformation on all kinds of levels and using that word. There's offices of transformation. I mean, it's really totally infiltrated there because people are recognizing we can't get there from here. This
Right.
old paradigm does not contain the way to where we need to be if we're going to have a peaceful and happy world. If everybody's kids are going to go to bed safe, fed, and warm, then we need to do things differently. The UN is recognizing that. They're doing work on their own internal shifting of internal structures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happening over time. There's the SDG summit coming up, the summit of the future, and that's really internally looking since the UN turned 75. What I'm doing there, I began something called the Unit of Cluster, which is now an official UN mechanism, and maybe probably for the first time that an application to form a mechanism within the UN had the words love and consciousness in it and got accepted. So I think that was already pretty good.
Well, good for you.
Since then, we've gathered quite a few NGOs who are on the ground at the UN who are realizing that we have to go to this by a different means. And so what I'm saying at a lot of meetings now is we can't keep fixing the same old system. Yes, you have to put food in hungry kids' mouths. You have to fix infrastructure. But at the same time, if you keep fixing something, all you really do is proliferate a problematic system.
Mm-hmm.
Not working on what is the new system, what's the new ontology, what's the paradigmatic shift, what's the ontological basis of a new way of being. And that's that's a question that will change for millennia going forward if we answer that question well, starting in this. And so I'm raising at UN conversations, I'm saying if we don't deal with this from the domain of consciousness, if we don't look at the deeper levels of what's driving people's decision making, if we don't look at what's the kind of zeitgeist, or what's the gestalt underneath all of this thinking, then we're only just going to keep going and trying to fix that. Or if we get to this SDG, sustainable development goal, if we do this sustainable development goal, and what the world is realizing is that we're not going to realize any of the sustainable development goals if we don't attend to all of the sustainable development goals. They are one thing. And so you usually see, I'm going to grab it real fast, there's a graphic that's used for the These are a 17-item to-do list the entire world agreed on. And it's like no poverty, peace and justice, those kinds of things. And it's 17 of them, the environment. Right. So what I say is my work is in the white spaces in between these.
Getting everybody to come together. And
it's not just everybody coming together, it's also opening this, dilating the space, dilating the idea, where is the work? Is it in creating another well in a village? Yes. But is it about making sure there's equity across populations so there's no question that a village drinks water? That if we get the culture right, the SDGs will be a natural outcome. But if we keep pounding away at this SDG and pound away at that SDG, that's a very young approach, right? We keep pounding at this, we try that, and we push this as, and part of youngizing thing is looking at the details. We need that. It's not yin or yang, it's both. It's the discernment of when we need the other. We have just been so yang dominant that we've got to stretch and maybe go a little too far yin. Risk.
Yes.
When in doubt, yin out. When in doubt, yin out. Try that other, just let go, take a breath.
I think well-meaning, meaning the UN, and I think that, but in an imperfect world, which we certainly live in, people attempt to come together and do the best that they can. And what you're recognizing is it can be better if we were to bring in these invisible factors. And that leads me to kind of the question to kind of sum up our interview. What advice would you have for a conscious leader to inspire them to become more effective and authentic leaders, particularly in today's what I call rapidly changing world? I mean, every time you turn the corner, there's something new, and it's got a ripple effect, right? It's whether it's the economy or it's education or it's things that are happening at the UN or it's the war in Ukraine or it's this or it's that. I mean, there's so many of these problems, and it's not that, and as a world, we haven't had many problems to deal with over the course of history. We have plenty. It seems like they move so fast now, meaning much more quickly. So this whole part about being agile, I mean, you're talking about, am I an agile leader? That's a big thing today. What would you tell people that are out there today that want to be conscious, but at the same time, they've got to create measurements, they've got to give reports, they have to be compassionate, they have to be understanding, and they're finding it daunting, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's all this that I need to do. And then there's no time for me.
Yeah, we're caught in the crossfire of shifting valuations in the world, and our economic valuations are still heavily wired to thinking that is not a survival plan for an individual or for the world.
Right.
And so it's partly having the confidence to step out of that paradigm, even for a minute, to just take a breath. To like I said, when in doubt, yin out. Sometimes I think it's as easy as a trip to the bathroom. Like, if you find yourself just really in the angst of it, step out, take a breath, value that little inkling, that little kind of jumping in your belly. Value that, take a moment and honor it, walk into your office and don't respond. Sometimes quiet is the best way to respond in the moment. I'll talk to you later. And to be in the confusion, to wrestle, to go ahead and wrestle with confusion of, all the tried and true laws of business are telling me one thing, the world's kind of going in another direction. I know here that what we're talking about today matters. I don't know how to integrate that, which is why I wrote the book, to integrate these things. You know, and to just honor that space of not knowing how to go there. Honor the question.
Well,
And
I think
honor,
I would reflect on a recent guest, Dr. Thomas More, The Eloquence of Silence. You just talked about silence, but there's something even deeper, and that is emptiness. And I think what happens is when the bucket gets empty, as a species, we immediately get frightened and we got to fill it up with something because it
yes.
isn't enough. So how are we dealing? You said, hey, go to the bathroom. Okay. Yeah. The
Take a
point,
walk.
the take a walk, do whatever it is. My point is, how are you as a leader with emptiness? How are you as a leader with just letting things be versus always trying to fix them? You know, and there's something to be said for that, Joni. I'm reflecting on this for a really important reason. And the reason is when I left that interview with Thomas More on the eloquence of silence and the reflection of the verses of poetry that were used in the book to get one to reflect on this emptiness, right? It's like, do you immediately want to go fill your bucket? When it's empty?
And I love full buckets. There's nothing wrong with full buckets, but
Yeah.
you're right. Like it's a fear, and that's part of this whole paradigm,
That's
right?
right.
It's a very fear-motivated paradigm. And you could say at the very basis, the paradigm shift is a fear-based to a love-based paradigm.
There you go.
That's kind of the bottom line. And so if you're again, it's taking that moment to reflect. Am I responding? Am I reacting to this out of fear? Or am I responding in a more loving place? It doesn't mean romantic love. It's a much more expansive idea. That's why I like yin and yang. Am I coming from this yang place where I got to fill, or am I coming from the place of equanimity, where I've been so full that the real the pendulum is always swinging in life, right? It's never still. That's Jesus said life is a movement and a rest, right? In the Gospel of Thomas. There's that, and that's the Taoist teachings, right? It's always moving, and that's the yin and the yang. It's not one thing. It's always moving. It's always headed. Yang attracts yin, yin attracts yang. It's always in the flow there. And so if the bucket's been very full for a really long time, there probably is an inner calling that's saying, empty, empty, empty,
yeah.
please,
well,
calling.
I've ended podcasts on this note many times, but I always reflect on it because the Dalai Lama said, and I have it on my wall over here and I can see it every day, in the end you're going to be remembered by who loved you, how much you loved, and how much you let go. And I think if you really were to kind of sum it up, you're talking about the yin, it's like, how many people are you actually compassionate with, showing love and support? And how many people are showing you love and support? That's the only thing that's going to end our world's problems, period. Sum total. I don't care what anybody else says. And how much are you willing to let go and not have to be right because your ego is so strong that it's saying, okay, I'm going to fight this person till the end, whatever it might be. And I think if you look at those three simple little things, you might say, if I lived my life with that motto, right, that things might be really pretty good most of the time.
Yeah, like if a leader walks in a room and an employee made a really stupid mistake,
right?
You're at a moment of choice here.
Right.
You can, and maybe it was a fireable offense. I don't know, but no matter what, you have the choice to go into a very heavy, young, dominant, nasty reactivity, fear-based reactivity. They're going to ruin my business, and putting people down, which is going to screw up your culture and not serve you in the long run. Can you take that moment, or maybe 3 days in your office and then some self-reflection, to get to a point where you have internal equanimity with the situation?
Right.
That's when I say go for that, and then go to that person and respond. And when we say love, I mean, people, it's almost like saying God. People pack so much into that I worry about using that word, especially in office. But that is, kind of the bottom line. Can you respond in a kind, compassionate, caring way? It may be firing the person. That's not really the point. The point is, who are you? Who are you in the situation? And that's what you're accountable for. Are you a jerk, more of a jerk than the mistake was? Or are you a kind and caring person that the Dalai Lama is pointing toward? And when you can be that person, things happen. The data is in. Things happen. Your company will be more successful. We know that.
Those are the invisible factors in this book. And for all of my listeners, the Alchemy of Power. And if you look to the back, it says, how conscious are you of the unseen power that drives results? This is a book that every leader should have. Joni, it's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth and you giving us some of your wisdom about these unseen or invisible factors of leadership that hopefully everybody will pick up a copy of the book and better understand what they are and really start to practice as much more conscious leaders. Namaste to you. Thank you for being on the show. Thanks for sharing some of your wisdom and insights. And you take care.
You're welcome. It's been a real pleasure, Greg.